There are basically three different kinds of costs of hosting an Olympics. Initially, there's a bid cost, and that could be $100 million just to, get your name in the hat. And then you've got infrastructure costs, building Brazil's been or Rio's been building transportation links and things like that. And there's specific sports infrastructure. You've got to build the stadiums and all this kind of stuff. And then there's obviously then the operating costs that go into that. Overall, they reckon the cost for the Rio Olympics are probably going to be around $11 billion. And this is money that could clearly have been spent in other areas. And that's why you get these protests that, it could have been spent on education or health or things like that. So there's always this friction then about whether this is the best use of money. And other people would argue, well, some of these infrastructure expenditures are going to be around for a long time. The economists would argue, well, if they're really that useful, you would have done them without the Olympics anyway. A lot of the sports infrastructure ends up being obsolete. You see that particularly in Athens and Beijing. Some of those iconic, the cube, the swimming cube or whatever it was, was an indoor dry ski slope for a while. They're not used well. The Olympic Stadium in London has only just started being used for a soccer team. So you get a lot of things that aren't used, beyond the Olympics. Those costs that can't be recouped. Obviously, this year you've got added security costs that keep escalating. I think the estimated security costs are probably about $1.6 billion this year for holding the Olympics in Rio. And as an economist, we always say there's opportunity costs. These things, these expenditures could have been used in other ways. There are basically then some revenue streams that host cities expect to generate. So visitor spending is one, for example. In London, visitor spending was about $1 billion. But interestingly, in London, visitor numbers went down during the Olympics because other people that would have visited London don't want to go during the Olympics, and so even that may be a negative effect relative to normal times. And Rio's a popular destination for a lot of people who want to go to Brazil. The other revenues that the Olympics generates, big, huge revenues, are media and sponsorship, but a lot of them accrue to the IOC, the Olympic Committee, that does share some with the cities, but it's not a predetermined amount or anything like that. And so a lot of the backers of host cities are on this legacy effect. It increases their civic pride, it increases their status in the world. There were some studies found that trade did increase with cities that were hosting or associated with countries that were hosting the Olympics, but then it increased if you were just a bidder because it got your name out there as well. So why do cities host these Olympics then? Well, a lot of the people that push the Olympics are people associated with the construction industry, people associated with the hotel industry, and so you've got a very concentrated vocal group, whereas the detractors are spread and their costs are small. Also, you're seeing now with the countries that are bidding for the Olympics, they're less democratic in that, there was a time where people were willing to spend their tax dollars to attract big sporting events and Olympic events. But now the next round of bidding, the American cities have dropped out, a lot of Western European cities have dropped out, and they're less democratic because they don't have to respond to the public in terms of elections and that kind of thing. So I think that's some of the reasons why cities used to and which cities are now bidding for the Olympics. So how could the Olympics generate benefits for the host cities? And so a couple of suggestions that have been put out there by economists is that we should just pick 4 or 5 cities on a permanent basis and rotate those the events through those cities for the Winter or Summer Olympics as well. And you can see that with Augusta and the Masters, for example, the Masters tournament, in that people come back here every year. So the Augusta National can build the infrastructure that makes it a really tremendous event. It's a very popular event, and I've been to British Open courses elsewhere, and they got a lot of temporary stands and that kind of thing. And so the fact that something is in one place every year does benefit the local economy, because you can invest in that on a year-by-year basis, rather than just for a once-off and then everyone leaves and no one's ever going to come back. So there are ways that the IOC could look at doing that. I'm not sure that's necessarily on their radar, but that's one way that sporting events can have a positive impact on the local economies.